The sound of hoofbeats thundered across the dusty plains as Tessa Ryder peered anxiously through the worn lace curtains of her family's small ranch house. The setting sun cast long shadows across the property, illuminating the dozen men on horseback who had formed a menacing circle around the homestead. Each man wore a deputy's badge that glinted in the fading light, but Tessa knew they weren't there to uphold the law. They were there to take everything she and her sisters had left. "They're getting closer," whispered Lily, Tessa's 14-year-old sister, her voice quivering with fear. "What are we going to do?" "Stay away from the windows," Tessa commanded, pulling her sister back. At 22, she had become the head of the household after their parents' deaths last winter. She glanced at her other sister, 18-year-old Mary, who was clutching their father's old shotgun with trembling hands. "We aren't leaving," Mary declared, her eyes hard with determination despite her fear. "This is our land. Pa died protecting it." Tessa nodded grimly. Sheriff Wallace had been trying to force them off their land for months. Ever since the railroad company discovered their modest ranch sat on the perfect route for the new tracks coming through Copper Creek, Arizona territory. The year was 1885, and progress waited for no one, especially not three orphaned sisters with a small cattle ranch and a deed their father had died defending. "Tessa Ryder," Sheriff Wallace's voice boomed across the yard. "This is your last warning. You and your sisters need to clear out by sundown. The territory has claimed this land for the public good." "That's a lie," Tessa muttered, her hands curling into fists. "He's in the railroad's pocket and everyone knows it." The sisters huddled together in the main room of the house, the walls that had once felt so safe now seeming fragile against the threat outside. Their cattle had already been scattered or stolen over the past week, the work of Wallace's men, though he denied any involvement. Without their livestock, they had little chance of making the next tax payment, which Tessa suspected had been deliberately increased. "We have the deed," Mary insisted. "They can't just take our home." "They can if they forge documents claiming Pa sold it before he died," Tessa replied bitterly. "Wallace has the judge in his pocket too." A commotion outside drew their attention back to the window. Through the gathering dusk, they saw a lone rider approaching fast from the east, his horse kicking up clouds of dust. The deputies turned, hands moving to their holsters as the stranger rode directly toward their circle. The rider pulled his mount to a halt just outside the ring of men. He sat tall in the saddle, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed black hat. Even from a distance, Tessa could see he was different from Wallace's crude deputies. There was a confidence in his posture, a calm authority that made even the sheriff straighten slightly. "What's your business here?" Wallace barked at the newcomer. The stranger's voice carried easily across the yard, deep and measured. "Heard there might be some trouble at the Ryder place. Came to see what's happening." "Nothing that concerns outsiders," Wallace replied. "Official territory business." The stranger nudged his horse forward, breaking through the circle of deputies as if they weren't even there. "Is that so? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're harassing three young women who are just trying to keep their home." Tessa's breath caught as the rider moved into the light spilling from their windows. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with broad shoulders and a strong jawline dusted with stubble. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and the revolver at his hip looked well used but meticulously maintained. "Who is he?" Lily whispered, pressing her face against the glass. "I don't know," Tessa replied, unable to look away from the confrontation. Outside, Wallace was growing visibly agitated. "You'd best ride on, stranger. These women are trespassing on railroad property." "That's so." The stranger pulled a folded document from his saddlebag and held it up. Because I have a copy of the original land grant here, signed by the territorial governor, stating that Thomas Ryder and his heirs own this land outright with no encumbrances. Interesting how that conflicts with your claim." A shocked murmur ran through the deputies. Wallace's face reddened with fury. "Who the hell are you to interfere in my jurisdiction?" The stranger finally removed his hat, revealing dark hair and piercing eyes that even from a distance seemed to cut through the sheriff's bluster. "Name's Nathan Navarro. I used to ride with the Rangers in Texas. Now I work for Judge Harmon in the Federal Circuit Court." He tucked the document away. "And he's mighty interested in reports of local officials seizing private property without due process." Wallace's hand twitched near his gun. "Judge Harmon has no authority here." "Federal judges have authority everywhere in the territory," Nathan replied calmly. "And he'll be in Copper Creek next week for a special hearing. I'm sure he'd be interested to meet you, Sheriff." The standoff stretched for a long moment. Tessa held her breath, watching as several of the deputies exchanged uncertain glances. Suddenly, Wallace gestured to his men. "You three stay here and watch the property. Make sure these women don't leave. The rest of you back to town." He glared at Nathan. "This isn't over." As Wallace and most of his men rode away, Nathan dismounted and approached the house. The three remaining deputies kept their distance but watched with open hostility. "Miss Ryder," he called, "I'd like to speak with you if I could." Tessa hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "Mary, keep the shotgun ready. Lily, stay back from the windows." She opened the door just enough to see the stranger clearly, keeping one hand hidden with her father's revolver. "Mr. Navarro, is it? What do you want with us?" His eyes met hers, a deep green that reminded her of the forest beyond their property, and for a moment, Tessa forgot the danger they were in. "I'm here to help you and your sisters," he said quietly. "But we don't have much time. Wallace has telegraphed for reinforcements from the county seat. They'll be here by morning with forged eviction papers." "Why should we trust you?" Tessa demanded, even as something in his steady gaze made her want to. "Because I knew your father," Nathan replied, his expression softening. "Thomas Ryder once saved my life during a cattle drive gone wrong. When I heard his daughters were being forced off their land, I came to return the favor." Tessa's grip on the hidden revolver loosened slightly. "Our father never mentioned you." A small smile crossed Nathan's face. "He wouldn't have. It wasn't his way to talk about helping folks." He glanced back at the three deputies who were setting up camp at the edge of the property. "We need to get you and your sisters somewhere safe until the judge arrives. Do you have family nearby, friends who could take you in?" Tessa shook her head. "No one who wouldn't be risking the sheriff's wrath by helping us." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "Then I'll have to get you to my camp in the hills. Judge Harmon has men there who can protect you until the hearing. Leave our home." Mary stepped up beside Tessa, her voice rising. "That's exactly what they want. It's just temporary," Nathan assured them. "Those men won't leave, and when their reinforcements arrive tomorrow, they won't just ask you to go, they'll drag you out. I've seen it happen before." Tessa studied him, trying to determine if he was telling the truth. His eyes held no deception she could detect, only genuine concern and a steely resolve that somehow eased the knot of fear in her chest. "If we leave now, we'll never get our home back," she argued, though with less conviction. "You will," Nathan promised. "I have evidence of Wallace's corruption that the judge needs to see. But that won't matter if something happens to you three before the hearing." The gravity in his voice sent a chill down Tessa's spine. She glanced at her sister's, Lily's frightened face, Mary's defiant one, and made her decision. "We'll need a few minutes to gather our things," she said finally. Nathan nodded. "Pack light, only what you can carry on horseback, and be quick about it." As the sisters hurriedly gathered their most precious possessions, Tessa's mind raced. She secured their parents' wedding rings and the family Bible in a small leather pouch, along with the original deed to the property that her father had hidden beneath a floorboard. Mary packed clothing and some food, while Lily tearfully clutched their mother's hand mirror and a quilt their grandmother had made. "What about the deputies?" Mary whispered as they prepared to leave. "I'll handle them," Nathan replied from his position at the window. "There's a trail behind your property that leads through the ravine. It's not well known." "It is to us," Tessa said. "Our father showed us every inch of this land." Nathan smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "Good, that'll help. Now, when I signal, you'll need to slip out the back door and make for the stable. Stay low and quiet." The plan unfolded quickly. Nathan created a distraction by approaching the deputies with an offer to share his whiskey, positioning himself so they had to turn away from the rear of the house. The moment they were engaged, he gave a subtle nod toward the window. Heart pounding, Tessa led her sisters through the back door and across the shadowy yard to the stable. They saddled their 3 remaining horses as quietly as possible, Tessa helping Lily with hers while trying to calm the animals, who seemed to sense the tension in the air. Just as they were leading the horses out, Nathan appeared beside them, moving with surprising stealth for such a large man. "The deputies," Tessa whispered. "Enjoying what they think is my last bottle of whiskey," he replied with a hint of amusement. "They'll be looking the other way for a while." He helped them mount, then swung up onto his own horse, a magnificent black stallion that stood at least a hand taller than their farm horses. "Stay close and follow me," he instructed, keeping his voice low. "If we get separated, head east toward Thunder Ridge. There's a waterfall at the base. My camp is behind it." With that, he led them away from the only home the sisters had ever known, taking a winding path through the trees that bordered their property. Tessa couldn't help looking back once at the warm light glowing from the windows of their house, wondering if she would ever see it again. They rode in tense silence for nearly an hour, following game trails and dry creek beds that wouldn't hold tracks. Nathan led them confidently through the darkness, occasionally stopping to listen for pursuers. The moon rose, providing just enough light to navigate by, though Tessa noticed he seemed to know the way instinctively. When they reached a small clearing, Nathan finally slowed. "We can rest the horses for a few minutes," he said, dismounting. "But we need to keep moving. It won't take Wallace's men long to realize you're gone." Lily slid from her horse with a wince. At 14, she wasn't accustomed to hard riding. "How much further?" "About 3 hours," he replied, his voice gentler when addressing the youngest sister. "Think you can make it?" Lily nodded bravely, though Tessa could see the exhaustion in her face. "You said you knew our father," Mary said, still watching Nathan with suspicion. "How?" Nathan helped Lily stretch her legs before answering. "I was just a boy of 17 when I joined a cattle drive heading from Texas to the railhead in Dodge. Your father was the trail boss. There was a flash flood that swept through our camp one night. I got caught in it, pinned under a fallen tree in rising water." His voice grew quieter. "Your father jumped in after me when no one else would risk it, pulled me out just before I would have drowned." The simple story had the ring of truth, and Tessa found herself believing him despite her usual caution. "That sounds like Pa," she admitted. "He never could stand by if someone needed help." "No, he couldn't," Nathan agreed. "It's why I'm here now." Tessa approached him while her sisters tended the horses. "These men you mentioned, at your camp, who are they?" "U.S. Marshals," Nathan replied. "Judge Harmon has been investigating land fraud across the territory. Railroad companies have been bribing local officials to force people off their property all through Arizona." "And you, are you a marshal too?" Nathan hesitated. Not officially. I've been helping the judge gather evidence. I know the territory, and people talk more freely to a drifter than a lawman. Before Tessa could ask more questions, he stiffened, his head turning sharply toward the way they had come. Riders, he said. At least 5 of them, moving fast. Tessa heard it then, the distant drumming of hooves. They've found our trail. We need to move, Nathan said urgently, already helping Lily back onto her horse. There's a place up ahead where we can lose them, a series of rocky slopes that won't hold tracks. They rode hard through the night, the sounds of pursuit sometimes fading, sometimes growing alarmingly close. Nathan led them through a maze of canyons and ridges, often choosing paths that seemed to lead nowhere until they unexpectedly opened onto new trails. Tessa rode alongside Lily, watching her sister's strength flagging. Just a little further, she encouraged, though she had no idea how much distance remained. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached Thunder Ridge, a towering cliff face split by a narrow waterfall that dropped into a small, misty pool. Nathan led them around the edge of the pool to what appeared to be a solid rock wall, partly hidden by the cascading water. Only when they were right upon it did Tessa see the narrow opening, a natural passage just wide enough for a horse to pass through sideways. In here, Nathan directed, dismounting to lead his stallion through the gap. The passage opened into a stunning hidden canyon, perhaps half a mile across, with steep walls rising on all sides. A stream from the waterfall ran through its center, feeding lush grass and scattered trees. Near the far wall, Tessa could see several canvas tents and the glow of a campfire. 3 men rose as they approached, hands near their weapons, until Nathan called out a greeting. The tension visibly drained from the camp as they recognized him. "Cutting it close, Navarro," one of the men called. He was older, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. "We were about to send out a search party. Had to convince the ladies to come along," Nathan replied, helping Tessa dismount. "Miss Tessa, Mary, and Lily Ryder. This is Marshal Daniel Cooper and his deputies, Jackson and Miller." Marshal Cooper approached, his weathered face kind beneath its stern exterior. "Miss Ryder, we've been hoping to meet you. Your situation isn't unique, I'm afraid. We've documented 20 similar cases across the territory in the past year. Then you can help us keep our home." Tessa asked, exhaustion making her blunt. "That's the plan," Cooper confirmed. "But first, you ladies look dead on your feet. Jackson's wife, Sarah, is in that tent there. She'll get you settled." A kindly woman in her 40s emerged from one of the tents, quickly taking charge of the sisters and ushering them toward a large tent equipped with cots and simple amenities. "You can wash up at the stream," Sarah told them, pointing to a secluded bend. "I've got fresh clothes that should fit well enough, and hot food will be ready soon." Tessa wanted to ask more questions, to understand exactly what was happening, but the promise of clean water and food was too tempting after their harrowing escape. She and her sisters gratefully accepted Sarah's guidance. After washing away the dust of their journey and changing into the clean, if slightly ill-fitting clothes provided, the Ryder sisters emerged to find a hearty breakfast waiting. Nathan was deep in conversation with Marshal Cooper, but he broke off when he saw them approach. "Feeling better?" he asked, his eyes lingering on Tessa in a way that made her conscious of her damp hair and borrowed dress. "Yes, thank you," she replied, accepting the plate Sarah handed her. "But I have questions that need answers." Cooper gestured for them to sit. "Of course you do. Eat first, then we'll explain everything." The food revived Tessa's spirits. Fresh biscuits, bacon, and strong coffee tasted like heaven after their night of fear and flight. As they ate, she observed the camp more carefully. It was well organized and clearly established for an extended stay. Beyond the main tents, she could see a natural corral where their horses now grazed contentedly. When they'd finished eating, Cooper produced a map and spread it across a makeshift table. For the past year, Judge Harmon has been tracking a pattern of land seizures across the territory, he explained. The Western Pacific Railroad has been buying up property along their proposed route, which is perfectly legal. But where owners refuse to sell, like our father, Mary interjected. Exactly, Cooper nodded. Where owners refuse to sell, there's been a pattern of harassment, followed by suspicious deaths or legal troubles that force the families off the land. Tessa's throat tightened. Our father's accident. Nathan's eyes met hers. We don't think it was an accident. Thomas Ryder was an experienced horseman. The story about his horse being spooked by a rattlesnake never made sense. We always thought so too, Tessa whispered, feeling the grief she'd pushed down for months rising freshly. Cooper continued, We have sworn statements from former deputies in 3 counties, admitting they were paid to intimidate landowners. We have financial records showing payments from the railroad to local officials, including Sheriff Wallace. What we don't have, Nathan added, is someone willing to testify who actually suffered these illegal seizures. Previous victims have either left the territory or been too afraid to speak up. Tessa understood what they were asking. You want us to testify against Wallace and the railroad? Yes, Cooper said frankly. Judge Harmon will convene a special hearing in Copper Creek next week. With your testimony and our evidence, we can stop this corruption and ensure you keep your land. It won't be without risk, Nathan warned, his expression grave. Wallace and his backers won't give up easily. That's why we brought you here. This place is nearly impossible to find if you don't know it exists. Tessa looked at her sisters. Lily's eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and excitement, while Mary's face showed the same determination that had driven her to stand at the window with their father's shotgun. We'll do it, Tessa decided. Our father believed in standing up for what's right. We won't dishonor his memory by doing any less. Nathan's face softened with approval. You're as brave as he was. For the next several days, the Ryder sisters settled into life at the hidden camp. Marshal Cooper and his deputies maintained a vigilant watch, occasionally venturing out to gather intelligence from town. Sarah Cooper proved to be not only a kind hostess, but a skilled nurse who tended to Lily's saddle sores and Mary's sprained wrist that she'd hidden during their escape. Nathan, Tessa discovered, was often absent during the days, returning at dusk with news from Copper Creek. The town, it seemed, was in an uproar over the sisters' disappearance. Sheriff Wallace had publicly accused them of abandoning their property, claiming it as evidence they had no legal right to it in the first place. He's also offering a reward for information on your whereabouts, Nathan reported on the 3rd evening, joining Tessa by the small fire outside their tent, and an even larger one for information on me. I'm sorry we've brought this trouble on you, Tessa said, watching the flames dance. The night was cool and she wrapped her borrowed shawl tighter around her shoulders. Nathan smiled slightly. I found this trouble all on my own, Miss Ryder, long before I met you. Please call me Tessa, she insisted. After saving my sisters and me from Wallace's men, I think we're past formalities. His smile widened, transforming his serious face. Tessa, then. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the hidden canyon rustling leaves, the distant waterfall, night birds calling creating a peaceful backdrop that seemed worlds away from the danger that had brought them there. How did you find this place? Tessa finally asked. I stumbled upon it years ago, tracking a mountain lion that had been preying on settlers' livestock, Nathan explained. I kept it to myself, thinking someday it might serve as a good hideout if I needed one. He looked around at the sheltered canyon. Never thought I'd be hiding 3 young women here, though. What about you? Tessa ventured. You said you rode with the Texas Rangers. How did you end up working for Judge Harmon? Nathan's expression grew more serious. After the Rangers, I drifted for a while. Took work where I could find it: ranch hand, scout, sometimes bounty hunter tracking fugitives. 2 years ago, I brought in a man wanted for land fraud in New Mexico territory. Judge Harmon was presiding over the case. He paused, poking at the fire with a stick. After the trial, he approached me, said he needed someone who knew the territories and could move freely without attracting attention. Someone who could gather evidence that marshals couldn't get. He shrugged. The pay was good, and it felt like worthwhile work. It is worthwhile, Tessa affirmed. What Wallace and the railroad are doing is wrong. My father built our ranch from nothing. He and my mother worked themselves to the bone to create something they could leave to us. Her voice caught. To have it stolen through lies and corruption. It won't happen, Nathan interrupted gently. Not if I can help it. Tessa studied him in the firelight, the strong lines of his face, the quiet confidence in his posture, the genuine concern in his eyes. She'd met many men since her father died, most of them viewing 3 women alone as easy targets. Nathan Navarro was different. He reminded her of her father, in some ways principled, capable, unafraid to stand against injustice. But there was something else about him that made her heart beat faster whenever he was near. Their conversation was interrupted by Lily, who emerged from their tent with a yawn. Mary's finally asleep, she reported, dropping down beside Tessa. She's been so tense I thought she'd never rest. Nathan smiled at the younger girl. Your sister's a fighter. All the Ryder women are, Lily replied with unexpected conviction. At 14, she still balanced between childhood and the woman she would become, but the events of the past year had matured her quickly. I believe it, Nathan said, his eyes moving back to Tessa with a warmth that made her cheeks flush. The following days fell into a pattern. During daylight hours, Marshal Cooper and Nathan prepared the sisters for the upcoming hearing, reviewing their testimony and coaching them on what to expect. Mary took to the legal aspects quickly, her mind sharp and analytical. Lily helped Sarah with the camp duties, her natural charm making her a favorite with the deputies. Tessa found herself increasingly in Nathan's company, whether discussing strategy or simply sharing stories of their lives. She learned he'd been born in southern Texas to a rancher father and a mother who'd come from Spain as a young woman. He'd lost both parents to fever when he was 16, joining the Rangers soon after. There was a quiet sorrow beneath his strength that Tessa recognized the same weight she carried since losing her parents. A week after their arrival at the hidden canyon, Nathan returned from town with news that Judge Harmon had arrived in Copper Creek. The hearing is set for day after tomorrow, he announced as they gathered for the evening meal. Wallace is scrambling. He knows something's happening, but he hasn't figured out exactly what. Is it safe for us to go into town? Mary asked, voicing the concern Tessa had been harboring. Marshal Cooper nodded. We'll have additional marshals arriving tomorrow, men I trust completely. You'll be under protection from the moment we leave this canyon until the hearing is concluded. And after, Tessa pressed. If the judge rules in our favor, Wallace and his men will still be in Copper Creek. The railroad will still want our land. Nathan's expression darkened. After the hearing, Wallace won't be sheriff anymore. He'll be facing federal charges. As for the railroad men, he exchanged a glance with Cooper. They tend to lose interest in properties that attract federal attention. That night, unable to sleep, Tessa slipped out of the tent she shared with her sisters. The canyon was peaceful under the stars, the only sounds the soft nickering of horses and the constant murmur of the waterfall. She walked toward the stream, wrapping her shawl around her against the cool night air. She was surprised to find Nathan already there, sitting on a fallen log beside the water. He rose when he saw her approach. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. Tessa shook her head. "Too much on my mind." "I know the feeling." He gestured to the log. "Would you like to sit?" She joined him, suddenly aware of how alone they were in the quiet night. It wasn't proper to be unchaperoned with a man like this, but the normal rules of society seemed distant in this hidden place, with all they'd been through. "Are you afraid?" Nathan asked after a moment. "About the hearing?" Tessa considered the question honestly. "Yes, but not of testifying. I'm afraid of what happens after, afraid that even if we win, we'll always be looking over our shoulders, afraid that my sisters will never feel truly safe again." Nathan turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Tessa, I want you to know that whatever happens at the hearing, you won't be alone afterward. He hesitated, seeming to search for words. "I care about what happens to you, to all of you," he added quickly. Something in his voice made Tessa's heart skip a beat. She'd felt a connection growing between them over the past day's conversations that lasted into the night, shared glances across the camp, the way his hand lingered when helping her mount her horse. But she'd attributed it to their unusual circumstances, to gratitude for his help. Now, sitting beside him under the vast starry sky, she recognized it was something more. "Nathan," she began, unsure what she wanted to say. He reached out, hesitantly taking her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused against her skin. "I know this isn't the right time. You're facing the fight of your life, and I'm supposed to be helping you professionally." His thumb traced a gentle circle on the back of her hand. "But I need you to know that my interest in helping you goes beyond my duty to Judge Harmon or my debt to your father." Tessa's breath caught. "What are you saying?" His green eyes held her steadily. "I'm saying that in just these few days, you've come to mean something to me. Your courage, your devotion to your sisters, your determination to fight for what's right," he broke off, shaking his head slightly. "I've never met anyone like you, Tessa Ryder." The simple honesty in his words touched something deep inside her. Since her parents' deaths, Tessa had locked away her own feelings, focused solely on survival and protecting her sisters. Nathan's confession cracked that careful barrier. "I feel it too," she admitted softly, "but I'm afraid to trust it. Everything in my life has been uncertain for so long." Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'm not asking for promises, just that you'll let me stay near after this is over. Let me help you rebuild if that's what you want. And if we lose, if we have to leave Copper Creek," his hand tightened slightly around hers, "then I'll help you start fresh somewhere else, if you'll let me." The offer hung between them, filled with possibilities Tessa hardly dared consider. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. Marshal Cooper appeared on the path, looking apologetic when he saw them. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, his tone suggesting he understood exactly what he was interrupting. "But we've got a situation. One of our scouts just returned. Wallace has deputized another dozen men. They're searching every canyon and ravine in a 20-mile radius." Nathan was on his feet instantly, though he didn't release Tessa's hand. "Do they know about this place?" "No indication they do," Cooper replied, "but they're getting closer than I'm comfortable with. We need to move up our timetable. I think we should head to town at first light, get the ladies settled at the judge's quarters before Wallace's men widen their search." Tessa stood as well, reluctantly pulling her hand from Nathan's. "We'll be ready." As Cooper nodded and departed, Nathan turned back to her. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging." "Nathan," Tessa said, catching his arm before he could step away. "What you said about staying near after this is over. I'd like that. Very much." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the canyon walls. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then that's what I'll do." The next morning was a flurry of activity as the camp was dismantled and packed. Any trace of their presence was meticulously removed. Marshal Cooper explained that the hidden canyon was too valuable a sanctuary to risk its discovery. By dawn, they were mounted and ready to depart. Nathan led the way through the narrow passage, the sisters following closely behind with the marshals bringing up the rear. Rather than returning the way they had come, they took a different route that wound along the ridge before descending toward Copper Creek from the north. "Wallace's men are searching the eastern approaches," Nathan explained as they paused to rest the horses. "This way adds a few hours, but it's safer." The town came into view shortly after midday, a growing settlement of perhaps 500 souls, with a main street lined by wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above the surroundings, and the newly constructed railroad depot standing prominently at the far end. They didn't enter directly. Instead, Nathan guided them to a modest house on the town's outskirts, where a stern-faced man with a shock of white hair waited on the porch. "Judge Harmon," Nathan called in greeting as they approached. The judge nodded, his sharp eyes assessing the sisters as they dismounted. "These are the Ryder girls, then. Glad to see you made it safely." He descended the steps, extending his hand first to Tessa. "Thomas Ryder's eldest, I presume. Your father was a good man. This territory's poorer without him." "Thank you, Your Honor," Tessa replied, immediately liking the judge's forthright manner. "You'll stay here tonight," Harmon continued, gesturing to the house. "It's my residence while in town. Marshal Cooper's men will guard the perimeter. The hearing begins at 9 tomorrow in the courthouse." Inside, the house was comfortably appointed but clearly temporary lodgings. Mrs. Harmon, a practical woman in her 60s, showed the sisters to a bedroom they would share. "It's not fancy," she apologized, "but it's clean and safe." "It's perfect," Tessa assured her. After a week in a tent, the simple room with its 3 beds and washstand seemed luxurious. That evening, they gathered in the judge's parlor to review the proceedings one final time. Judge Harmon explained that the hearing would be public. The people of this town need to see justice done openly, and that Wallace would likely be present. "He'll be served with papers charging him with corruption and abuse of office as soon as the hearing concludes," Harmon added. "So be prepared for him to fight desperately. He knows this is his last chance to silence you." Tessa exchanged glances with her sisters. Mary's jaw was set in determination, while Lily looked nervous but resolute. "We're ready, Your Honor," Tessa assured him. Later, as the household settled for the night, Nathan found a moment alone with Tessa in the small garden behind the house. The night was warm, fragrant with desert flowers that bloomed in the cooler evening air. "Tomorrow will change everything," he said quietly, "one way or another." Tessa nodded, watching the stars appear one by one above them. "I keep thinking about my father, how proud he'd be to see us fighting for our home." "He would be," Nathan agreed, "but I think he'd be even prouder of how you've kept your family together through all this." Tessa turned to him, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened since that evening when Sheriff Wallace's men had surrounded their home. "I couldn't have done it without you, Nathan. You risked everything to help 3 women you barely knew." "I knew your father," he reminded her gently. "And now I know you." His hand found hers in the gathering darkness. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I meant what I said last night. I'll be there if you want me to be." The sincerity in his voice gave Tessa courage. Standing on tiptoe, she pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "I do want that," she whispered. "More than I can say." For a breathless moment they stood close, the promise of something deeper than friendship hanging between them. Then, mindful of the house behind them and the importance of the day ahead, they reluctantly parted. "Get some rest," Nathan advised. "Tomorrow you'll need all your strength." Morning arrived with a clarity that seemed fitting for the day ahead. The sky was a perfect, cloudless blue, as the Ryder sisters dressed in their finest clothes, their own dresses that Marshal Cooper's men had retrieved from their homestead during the night. "Wallace's men are watching your property," Cooper reported as they ate breakfast, "but they didn't see our approach. We found these packed in a trunk, just where you said they'd be." Tessa smoothed the simple blue cotton of her best dress, grateful to have something of her own to wear for this important day. Mary wore their mother's green dress that they'd carefully altered to fit her, while Lily was in a pale yellow frock that made her look older than her 14 years. "You all look lovely," Mrs. Harmon approved. "Just the right impression for the court, respectable young women defending their rightful home." The walk to the courthouse was tense. Tessa was acutely aware of the stares from townspeople who recognized them. Some faces showed support, others curiosity, and a few displayed the same hostile suspicion that Wallace had been cultivating against them. Nathan and the marshals formed a protective escort, with Judge Harmon leading the way. As they climbed the courthouse steps, Tessa saw Sheriff Wallace standing across the street, his face dark with barely suppressed rage. Beside him were men in expensive suits who she guessed were railroad representatives. "Don't look at them," Nathan murmured at her side. "Keep your head high. This is your town, too." The courtroom was already packed when they entered. A space had been reserved for them at the front, where they took their seats with Nathan beside Tessa and Marshal Cooper beside Mary and Lily. At precisely 9 o'clock, the court clerk called for attention, and Judge Harmon entered to take his place at the bench. His demeanor had changed entirely from the previous evening. He was now every inch the federal judge, commanding respect with his mere presence. "This special hearing," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "has been convened to address allegations of corruption and illegal seizure of private property in Copper Creek and surrounding territories. The court will hear evidence regarding specific charges that local officials conspired with Western Pacific Railroad to deprive citizens of their lawfully owned lands through fraud, intimidation, and in some cases, violence." A murmur ran through the crowd. Tessa could feel Wallace's glare boring into her back, but refused to turn around. "The court calls Tessa Ryder as its first witness," the judge announced. With a reassuring squeeze of her hand from Nathan, Tessa rose and moved to the witness stand. After being sworn in, she faced the packed courtroom with as much composure as she could muster. For the next hour, she detailed everything that had happened since her father's death: the increasing taxes, the harassment of their livestock, the threats from Wallace and his deputies, and finally, the attempted forced eviction. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, drawing confidence from the attentive faces of the judge and jury of local citizens who had been hastily assembled. When Wallace's attorney cross-examined her, attempting to suggest that, as a young woman, she was incapable of managing the ranch and had invented these claims to cover her failure, Tessa's response was measured but firm. "My father taught his daughters everything about ranching, not because he didn't have sons, but because he believed women were just as capable. We were running that ranch successfully until Sheriff Wallace began his campaign to drive us off our land." Mary's testimony followed, her precise recollection of dates and specific threats impressing even the hostile attorney. Lily was spared testifying due to her age, though she sat straight-backed and dignified throughout. The most damning evidence came from Nathan and Marshall Cooper, who presented the financial records showing payments from the railroad to Wallace, along with sworn statements from former deputies who had participated in similar schemes in other towns. By mid-afternoon, the mood in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. Where there had been skepticism, Tessa now saw outrage on many faces. Townspeople she'd known all her life were looking at Sheriff Wallace with new awareness, connecting incidents they'd witnessed to the pattern of corruption being revealed. When Judge Harmon finally called Wallace himself to testify, the sheriff's bluster had disappeared. He attempted to deny the allegations, claiming the payments were legitimate business investments, but his explanations grew increasingly tangled under the judge's pointed questioning. As the day waned, Judge Harmon addressed the jury and the packed courtroom. The evidence presented today points to a systematic abuse of power and corruption of justice in this community. Sheriff Wallace has betrayed the trust placed in him by the citizens of Copper Creek, conspiring with corporate interests to illegally seize private property for personal gain. The judge's gaze swept the room. This territory was built by people like Tessa Ryder and his daughters, hardworking, honest folk who asked only for the chance to build something of their own. When officials sworn to protect that right instead become predators, the very foundation of our society is threatened. Turning to the jury, he continued, "You have heard the evidence. You must now determine if Sheriff Wallace and his conspirators have indeed violated the law and the trust of this community. I ask you to consider carefully the testimony you have heard today." The jury's deliberation was surprisingly brief. After less than an hour, they returned with a unanimous verdict: Sheriff Wallace was guilty of corruption, abuse of office, and conspiracy to illegally seize private property. Judge Harmon accepted the verdict with a solemn nod. "In light of this finding, I hereby order the immediate removal of Jacob Wallace from the office of sheriff. Furthermore, all actions taken by his office regarding the Ryder property are declared null and void." He turned to Tessa and her sisters. "The deed to your ranch remains valid and inviolable. No one may seize or trespass upon your property without due process of law." As for Wallace, the judge's sentence was swift. "Jacob Wallace, you are remanded into federal custody to await trial on criminal charges. Marshals, take him into custody." The courtroom erupted in a mix of reactions as Cooper's deputies moved to arrest the former sheriff. Some of Wallace's supporters shouted protests, while many others applauded the judge's decision. Through it all, Tessa sat in stunned silence, hardly able to believe it was over. They had won. Their home was safe. Nathan's hand found hers beneath the table, a warm anchor in the storm of emotion. "It's done," he said quietly. "You did it." The aftermath was chaotic but triumphant. As they left the courthouse, many townspeople approached to offer support and, in some cases, apologies for not standing with them sooner. The railroad representatives had disappeared, their corrupt scheme exposed and their local puppet removed from power. That evening at Judge Harmon's house, a small celebration brought together those who had helped bring Wallace to justice. Deputy Miller had been appointed acting sheriff until a proper election could be held, and he promised the Ryder sisters would have the full protection of his office as they returned to their ranch. "It might be wise to wait a day or two," Marshall Cooper advised. "Give us time to round up the last of Wallace's men. Some of them might hold grudges." Tessa agreed, though she was eager to return home. After the others had departed, leaving just the sisters, Nathan, and the judge and his wife, Harmon raised a toast. "To justice," he said simply, "and to the courage it takes to stand for what's right." As they sipped their drinks, the judge turned to Nathan. What will you do now, Navarro? I have other cases that could use your particular skills. Nathan's eyes met Tessa's across the room. I think I'd like to stay in Copper Creek for a while, Your Honor. There's something here worth staying for. The judge followed his gaze and smiled knowingly. I see. Well, the territory's loss is Copper Creek's gain, I suppose. Later, in the quiet of the garden where they had spoken the previous night, Nathan and Tessa found themselves alone again. Did you mean what you said to the judge? Tessa asked. About staying, Nathan nodded, taking both her hands in his. If you'll have me. I know it's soon, we've only known each other a short time, but I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you. Tessa's heart raced. In the time since he'd ridden up to their homestead that fateful evening, Nathan Navarro had become essential to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. My sisters and I have a ranch to rebuild, she said carefully. It won't be easy work. I'm not afraid of hard work. And there will be talk a single man helping 3 women living nearby. A smile tugged at his lips. I suppose there's one way to solve that particular problem. Tessa's breath caught as she realized what he was suggesting. Nathan, not right away, he hastened to add. I know we need time, but someday if you come to feel for me what I already feel for you, he reached up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. I'd be honored to call you my wife. The simple declaration, spoken with such honesty, melted the last of Tessa's hesitation. She had lost so much in the past year, her parents, her sense of security, nearly her home. But in this man, she had found something unexpected and precious. I think, she said softly, that day might come sooner than you imagine. Nathan's smile was radiant as he drew her closer. In the silver moonlight of the judge's garden, their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future, a future they would build together. 2 days later, the Ryder sisters returned to their ranch, escorted by Nathan and 2 of Deputy Miller's most trusted men. The homestead showed signs of neglect after their absence, but nothing that couldn't be repaired with hard work. As they rode through the gate, Tessa felt a weight lift from her shoulders. This land, with its rolling pastures and distant mountain views, had been her father's dream and was now her legacy. Looking at Nathan riding beside her, she realized it could also be the foundation of something new, a future built on love and trust, not just duty and determination. Over the following weeks, the ranch gradually returned to life. News of Wallace's corruption had spread throughout the territory, and many who had previously kept their distance now offered help and friendship. Neighboring ranchers drove cattle to replace those that had been stolen or scattered. The general store extended credit until they could get back on their feet. Even the new railroad representative approached with a fair offer to purchase a small section of their land for a proper right-of-way, an offer Tessa considered carefully before negotiating terms that benefited both parties. Nathan proved invaluable during this time. His knowledge of ranching, gained during his years drifting from job to job, complemented Tessa's own skills. He settled into a small cabin on the property, close enough to help but at a proper distance to quiet any gossip. As summer turned to autumn, the ranch prospered under their combined care. Mary discovered an aptitude for the business side of ranching, keeping meticulous books and negotiating surprisingly good terms with cattle buyers. Lily blossomed now that the threat to their home was gone. Returning to the studies, their mother had always encouraged and revealing a talent for teaching when she began helping the ranchers' children who lived too far from town to attend school regularly. And Tessa found herself falling more deeply in love with Nathan Navarro with each passing day. Their courtship progressed naturally, through shared work and quiet evenings on the porch, through Sunday drives to church and occasional dinners in town. He was everything she had first thought him to be: honorable, capable, and deeply committed to justice, but also gentle, thoughtful, and surprisingly poetic when they were alone. On a crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple, Nathan took her hand. "I've been thinking," he said, a hint of nervousness in his usually confident voice. "That cabin's getting awfully cold at night." Tessa raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "It is." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Winter's coming. Might be time for a more permanent arrangement." Her heart skipped a beat. "What did you have in mind, Mr. Navarro?" He slid from the porch swing to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Tessa Ryder, I've loved you since the night we rode away from this ranch together. You're the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known." From his pocket, he produced a simple gold ring. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tessa's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the man who had saved her home and her heart. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Their wedding took place in December, with Judge Harmon returning to Copper Creek to perform the ceremony. The small church was filled with friends and well-wishers, townsfolk who had stood with them during the hearing, neighboring ranchers, and the marshals who had protected them. Mary stood as Tessa's maid of honor, while Lily scattered winter flowers along the aisle. Marshal Cooper served as Nathan's best man, proudly announcing that Nathan had accepted a position as a special deputy with the territorial court, one that would allow him to remain in Copper Creek, while still helping Judge Harmon pursue justice across the territory. As Tessa walked down the aisle in her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered by Mrs. Harmon's skilled hands, she caught sight of Nathan waiting for her. The look of pure adoration on his face made her heart soar. This man, who had ridden into her life on the darkest of nights, had become her partner, her protector, and now her husband. When Judge Harmon pronounced them husband and wife, and Nathan's lips met hers in their first kiss as a married couple, Tessa knew that the danger and hardship they had faced had led to something beautiful: a love born of courage and justice, strengthened by shared purpose, and sealed with a promise that would last a lifetime. Spring found the Navarro Ryder ranch thriving. The main house had been expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Mary and Lily still sharing the original bedrooms while Tessa and Nathan took the new addition. The ranch itself had nearly doubled its cattle herd, thanks to Nathan's connections with Texas breeders and Mary's shrewd business acumen. Tessa stood on the porch, watching as Nathan worked with the new horses in the corral. His patience with the animals mirrored his patience with her sisters, who had both thrived under his gentle guidance. Mary had begun accompanying him on some of his deputy duties, discovering an interest in law that might someday lead her to follow in Judge Harmon's footsteps. Lily, now 15, was considering the teacher's college in Phoenix when she came of age, with Nathan's full support. As for Tessa herself, her hand drifted to her stomach, where the first subtle signs of their child had begun to show. She hadn't told Nathan yet, wanting to be certain before sharing the news that would make their happiness complete. The territory was changing rapidly around them. The railroad had brought new settlers, new opportunities, and new challenges. But here on the land her father had loved, with the man who had risked everything to help her keep it, Tessa had found a peace and purpose that transcended the struggles of the past. When Nathan looked up from the corral and saw her watching, his face broke into the smile that still made her heart race. He secured the gate and walked toward her, dust on his clothes and love in his eyes. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Navarro?" he asked, climbing the porch steps to stand beside her. Tessa leaned into his embrace, feeling the strength of his arms around her. "I was thinking about the night we met, about how afraid I was when I saw Sheriff Wallace's men surrounding our house. And now I'm thankful for it, she admitted, because it brought you to us, to me. Nathan's kiss was gentle, a promise renewed with each passing day. It brought me home, he corrected softly, where I always belonged. As they stood together, watching the sun set over the land they both loved, Tessa knew that the greatest journeys often began in moments of greatest peril. The sheriff's men had surrounded her house. The cowboy had ridden up and taken her and her sisters away, and in doing so, had led her to a love and a life more fulfilling than she could have imagined.